Yeowun's attention centered on the sword formations of the Sword Force of Sky Demon, engraved upon the sapphire stone pedestal on the upper floor of the library. As he scanned the space, he inwardly noted that he could now see the 4th and 3rd floors. An instructor stationed at the entrance noticed him at once. The man's expression tightened as he searched for Yeowun's identification tag, briefly assuming that its absence meant the cadet had failed. Yeowun then revealed the silver medal from his pocket, and the instructor's confusion deepened when he saw the engraved letter that marked Yeowun as a squad leader. Realization struck the instructor, and shock overtook him as he understood that Yeowun had passed the 4th test. His response caused a ripple of astonishment among the cadets waiting nearby, as well as the guards and instructors, for only an hour had passed since the completion of the 3rd test, and already someone had advanced. The instructor remained stunned. Having served at the academy for 3 full cycles, he had never witnessed a cadet clear the 4th test in such a short time. The instructor lowered his head in a respectful bow, offering an apology for the earlier confusion. Yeowun returned the gesture with calm composure, showing no displeasure. Afterward, he recorded his name in the booklet and accepted the candle required to access the 3rd floor. As he climbed the stairs, he glanced at the small flame to ensure it remained steady. On the 3rd floor, numerous cadets were absorbed in memorizing their chosen manuals. Wanghul, Baekji, Hobom, and the others sat among them, fully focused on their tasks. Yeowun walked directly toward the center of the library, where his attention locked onto the object he sought. The sapphire stone pedestal stood there, its front carved with poetry and its back filled with sword markings. The engravings on this pedestal were far denser and more intricate than those found on the 1st or 2nd pedestals. He immediately recognized that this formation appeared far more complex, but with limited time and many eyes around him, he chose not to linger on it. He silently instructed Nano to scan and store the markings, and the device complied without delay. Once the process finished, he moved on to the bookshelves and began scanning the manuals just as he had done on the lower floors. He opened the first book and flipped rapidly through its pages, allowing Nano to collect everything within moments. The once quiet library filled with the sharp rhythm of turning paper, causing irritation among the surrounding cadets, who glared in frustration at the familiar disturbance. By the end of his work, a total of 179 first-rate martial arts manuals from the 3rd floor had been fully scanned. Yeowun proceeded to the 4th floor, where he was allotted 6 full hours. His priority was clear. He needed to scan the 4th formation of the Sword Force of the Sky Demon and the counter-sword technique left behind by the Sword Demon. A pedestal stood at the center of the floor, but as he approached it, he halted in surprise. The stone was riddled with cracks, and one corner had been severed entirely. The clean precision of the cut left no doubt that a sword had sliced through it. The severity of the damage puzzled him, and when he examined the markings on the back, he noticed how different they were from those on the lower pedestals. These engravings were deeper, harsher, and far more chaotic. Nano analyzed them as well and determined that the lingering sword energy was nearly twice as powerful as the traces found on the previous pedestals. Curiosity stirred within him, but he restrained the urge to run a simulation. There was no need to rush. He could always investigate further in a private training room later. For now, he focused on scanning the damaged pedestal. Once that task was complete, he turned his attention to the shelves. A quick survey of the area revealed something unique about this floor. The books were divided into 3 distinct groups. The largest group consisted of master-level martial arts from the demonic cult, while the remaining manuals came from both the forces of justice and the forces of evil. He recognized many of these techniques as famous martial arts gathered over centuries. Although the clans that created them had likely refined their methods since these manuals were documented, acquiring this knowledge was still valuable. It would undoubtedly aid him when facing warriors from those factions. He decided to begin with the demonic cult texts, but just as he reached for the first book, a sudden realization struck him. He understood that he did not need to keep the master-level techniques solely for himself. The thought of passing them on to his own members sparked a wave of excitement within him. Yeowun continued scanning until the steady glow of the candle drew his attention. The flame had shrunk low, signaling that his allotted time was nearly over. By then, he had completed a substantial amount of work. He had scanned 245 manuals in total, 112 from the demonic warrior cult, 83 from the righteous faction, and 50 from the evil faction. When he finally stepped outside, night had already settled over the academy. An instructor waited for him with a weary expression, noting how long he had taken. Realizing how late it was, Yeowun apologized and began walking back toward the dormitory alongside him. As soon as he reached the dorms, his members reacted with astonishment upon learning he had been on the 4th floor, understanding immediately that he had passed the 4th test. Excitement spread among them as they offered their congratulations, thrilled by his achievement. Munku watched with admiration, reflecting inwardly that Yeowun had managed to pass the 4th examination in just one day. The thought of Yeowun becoming the one to claim the minor priesthood felt entirely possible to her. Yeowun then mentioned that this would be their final night together in the shared dormitory. The others paused in confusion, and he explained that students who passed the 4th examination were granted their own personal room, where he would begin staying the next day. Hobum reacted with dramatic urgency, rushing forward before the others pulled him back, while they reassured him that Yeowun was not abandoning them. Munku, meanwhile, grinned to herself as she realized that the reward for passing the 4th examination included a private dorm room. The next morning, Yeowun rose early, filled with anticipation at the thought of receiving his new personal weapon. He headed straight to the blacksmith's forge and waited patiently, his mind lingering on the idea of the weapon he would soon obtain. Although he had not spoken about it aloud, the desire had been with him for a long time. After about 30 minutes, a middle-aged man approached, a white bandana tied around his head. He greeted Yeowun with cheerful enthusiasm, acknowledging him as the cadet who had passed the 4th test in record time. Yeowun bowed respectfully, meeting the man for the first time. As the man stepped closer, Yeowun noticed something unusual about him. He had no hair anywhere on his body, not even eyebrows or leg hair. The man immediately understood the direction of Yeowun's gaze and explained that this appearance was simply a consequence of his work. He then introduced himself as Sunong, a descendant of the famed Yeowun. The name struck Yeowun at once. His extensive reading had familiarized him with the legendary blacksmith whose creations were renowned as masterpieces capable of cutting through a tiger with a single strike. Realizing that his own weapon would be forged by a member of that lineage came as an unexpected surprise. Sunong downplayed the significance, noting that Yeowun had produced many descendants and that his own craftsmanship did not match that of his ancestor. Yeowun responded with sincere respect, acknowledging that the blood of a remarkable craftsman still flowed through Sunong's veins. The blacksmith accepted the compliment with amusement and assured him that he would put forth his best effort in forging the weapon. From his observations, he noted that Yeowun wielded both a sword and a saber. Yeowun confirmed that he wielded both a sword and a saber, and he asked if it would be possible to have both forged. Sunong explained that he was permitted to forge only a single weapon and asked which one Yeowun intended to choose. Yeowun considered the decision carefully. He reflected on how the demonic lord's sword art had affected his current blade during the confrontation with the prisoner who had used the demonic blood reversal art. The numerous small scratches that appeared afterward had revealed the sword's limitations, and he realized that using the second form at that moment would likely have destroyed it completely. With that in mind, he reached a firm conclusion and chose the sword. Sunong approved of the choice, noting that his own specialty lay in crafting swords rather than sabers. He then requested to see Yeowun's sword techniques before beginning the forging process, explaining that he needed to observe them in order to determine the appropriate size, hardness, and shape for the blade. Yeowun acknowledged the request and drew the simple Academy-issued sword from his back. As he prepared himself, the atmosphere shifted sharply, causing Sunong to gasp in surprise even before the first movement began. Yeowun then executed the first formation of the sword force of the Sky Demon. 24 precise movements cut through the air, each leaving a faint trace in their wake. When the formation ended, the lingering energy burst outward, sending a small gust of wind sweeping across the forge. When Yeowun finished the formation, Sunong slowly emerged from his stunned daze. His eyes remained unfocused as he turned toward Yeowun, who asked whether the demonstration had been sufficient. Sunong frowned, still shaken, and admitted that he could not make the sword. The unexpected answer caught Yeowun off guard, and he questioned what Sunong meant. Instead of explaining immediately, Sunong asked to see the sword Yeowun had just used. When Yeowun handed it over, the blacksmith retrieved a hammer from his pouch and struck the blade once. The sword shattered instantly. The single blow confirmed that the weapon had already been pushed past its limits by the sword techniques Yeowun had performed moments earlier. Sunong then explained that no ordinary sword could withstand techniques of that level. When Yeowun asked if the sword could simply be forged sturdier, Sunong clarified that it was not a matter of basic craftsmanship. To endure Yeowun's sword movements, the blade would need to be forged from frost iron, a metal infused with the cold energy of the North Sea, far stronger than common iron. However, frost iron was extremely rare, and the cult reserved it only for those of warden rank or higher. Yeowun accepted this explanation. Inwardly, he reflected on the realization that the demonic lord's sword art was far more powerful than he had expected. Sunong apologized with genuine regret, explaining that witnessing Yeowun's sword technique had ignited his passion as a craftsman, yet he was still unable to help with forging a proper sword. Yeowun accepted this without frustration, deciding that the only solution was to pass the 5th examination and earn the warden rank required to receive frost iron. Sunong then offered the next best option. He could forge a saber, provided he first observed Yeowun's saber techniques. Yeowun agreed, and after watching the dancing butterfly technique, Sunong confirmed that he would be able to craft a suitable saber. He instructed Yeowun to return in 2 weeks to collect it. After leaving the forge, Yeowun made his way to the training hall. Upon entering, he immediately sensed that more people were present than usual. Many students had evidently reached the level of Ascendant Master. This only strengthened his resolve, convincing him that he needed to advance to the level of Transcendent Master without delay. He then opened the 2 wooden boxes containing the black dragon balls he had earned from passing the 3rd and 4th examinations. He debated whether to consume them separately or together, but the hesitation lasted only a moment before he tossed both into his mouth at once. The bitterness was overwhelming, far worse than when he had taken just one, but he forced himself to chew and swallow. Rising from his seat, he began circulating the sword force of the Sky Demon and instructed Nano to assist in absorbing the energy from the Dragon Balls. Nano detected a large influx of a substance that rapidly accelerated his internal energy flow. Yeowun cut off the technical explanation, recognizing that the message ultimately meant the process was going to be extremely painful. Yu Baek, the founder of the poison sect and known throughout history as the Lord of a Million Poisons, had been a master not only of toxins but also of medicine. Through relentless trial and error, he created what later became the demonic dragon marbles. Thanks to his efforts, the marbles were refined into their current form, perfectly sized for consumption, and considered the safest and most stable method for rapidly absorbing energy without overwhelming the pressure points. As Yeowun meditated with the sword force of the Sky Demon, sweat poured down his body. Using the breathing technique increased the marble's effectiveness, but moving while doing so magnified the agony. The internal energy surging through his blood points felt as though it would tear his body apart, forcing pained groans from his throat. In the next moment, blood burst from his back as a vital blood point ruptured from the violent expansion. The wound, however, closed immediately as the Nano Machine repaired the damage. Had any other cadet attempted this, all their blood points would have torn apart, killing them long before the process ended, but Nano's intervention allowed Yeowun to endure and absorb the overflowing energy. With 2 demonic dragon marbles consumed simultaneously, the energy coursing through his meridian channels grew uncontrollably wild. 4 hours later, intense heat radiated through the training room from Yeowun's body. Exhausted, he collapsed to the floor, panting heavily. He understood how close he had come to death and recognized that consuming powerful medicine carelessly was dangerous. It was a harsh reminder not to let ambition overcome caution. When he finally calmed his breathing, he assessed the internal energy he had gained. Each black dragon ball should have increased his energy by about 20 years. Yet when he checked, his eyes widened. He repeated the measurement, but the result did not change. He had gained 60 years worth of internal energy. The increase defied explanation at first, but he soon understood. It was not solely Nano's assistance. The breathing method of the sword force of the Sky Demon had amplified everything. Yeowun decided to test the newly gained internal energy and guided it through his body. The result was even more astonishing than before. His expanded blood points allowed the circulation to flow with far greater ease, and he realized that this would let him unleash twice the amount of energy when using his sword techniques. He rose and summoned chi into his hand. The gathered energy was noticeably larger and denser than before, prompting a satisfied smile. He recognized that, although he had not yet reached any awakenings or attained the level of Transcendent Master, the immense internal power he now possessed had given him the solid foundation he needed. With that strength, it was finally time to learn the second half of the Demonic Lord's sword art. He instructed Nano to extract the internal power and chi circulation techniques from the formations engraved on the sapphire stone of the 3rd floor, and to transfer both the Demonic Lord's sword art and the counter technique as well. A sharp pinching sensation spread across his head as the knowledge settled into place. He then asked Nano how many attempts it had taken for the counter technique to successfully halt the Demonic Lord's sword art. Nano explained that the counter had managed to disrupt the 3rd codified fighting form on its 93rd attempt. This clarified why the stone had held so many more sword markings compared to the earlier formations. The 3rd form was significantly stronger than the previous 2. Yeowun then requested that the 3rd codified form be transferred to his body. Nano reported that his physical strength had already reached its safe limit. Further transfer of enhanced muscle structures could interrupt his natural growth and was therefore not recommended. Yeowun pressed further, asking if the transfer was still possible. Nano replied that it could be done, but only if Yeowun was willing to accept his current height permanently. Yeowun hesitated as he considered Nano's warning. The knowledge of the 3rd codified form was already in his mind, yet being unable to use it left an uncomfortable uncomfortable feeling. Nano clarified that attempting it now would strain his body, but he would still be able to perform it once. That single opportunity was enough. Since the second form had already proven to be vastly stronger than the first, his curiosity compelled him to try the third. Yeowun gathered sword chi at his fingertips and began the movements of the sword force of the Sky Demon's third formation, and 24 strikes tore through the air like a raging storm, each movement leaving a vivid trail behind it. The power surged beyond what his muscles could sustain, and in only a few seconds, he felt sharp pain radiating through his body. The technique clearly exceeded the physical limits of his current form. When he finished, he dropped to one knee, unable to remain standing as his muscles burned from the strain. Despite the discomfort, he soon noticed something astonishing. Sword markings now covered the floor around him, as though countless blades had erupted from the spot where he stood. He had not even executed the technique with full intent, yet its strength had carved those marks effortlessly. The sword demon had needed many attempts to counter this form because its force was overwhelming. After Nano repaired the damage to his muscles, Yeowun tested the third counter sword formation. This time his muscles held, but the technique itself was so complex and demanding that he finished breathless. Realizing how difficult the third formation already was, he wondered about the strength of the fourth. He immediately instructed Nano to transfer the codified fighting forms from the sapphire stone on the fourth floor, and Nano confirmed the command. After the transfer, Yeowun frowned. The techniques were stored in his mind, and he could visualize their structure, yet something was missing. He could not see the outcome of the fourth formation in his thoughts. Since he could not perform it physically, he needed to witness the techniques through augmented reality. He instructed Nano to display both formations in combat. Lines of white light took shape before his eyes, forming two figures. They moved at once, each unleashing the fourth formation engraved on the pedestal. White sparks scattered as the techniques clashed. The exchange ended in an instant, but the result was unlike anything Yeowun had seen before. It ended in a tie. The counter technique failed to disrupt the demonic lord's sword art. Yeowun repeated the simulation many times, but the outcome never changed. The counter formation could not break the technique. The final strike of the sword force carried a spinning motion that produced tremendous power, yet the counter blocked it each time, neither overpowering nor being overpowered. He then asked Nano how many counter attempts had been carved into the pedestal. Nano reported that approximately 130 attempts were recorded, and on the final attempt, the edge of the sapphire stone had been severed during the 24th movement. Yeowun immediately understood. Cutting sapphire required immense focus, far beyond simply infusing energy into a strike. The final form of the demonic lord's sword art must have demanded extremely concentrated power, enough to match the counter technique blow for blow. It was likely that the missing corner of the pedestal had been cut from sheer frustration after being unable to surpass the sword art through ordinary means. The creator of the markings had challenged someone of overwhelming strength, and even failure had not stopped him from pushing further. Yeowun considered that he still might not fully understand these sword techniques. Strengthening his body and transferring knowledge alone could only take him so far. Ultimately, he needed to deepen his understanding of martial arts itself. He accepted that reaching the next awakening would require this step, leaving him with no other choice but to pursue it. The sun climbed high as Yeowun and his group gathered in the cafeteria. Laughter echoed around the table, and the atmosphere brimmed with warmth. Wang Hul devoured bowl after bowl, eating with such enthusiasm that the others could not help but jeer at him. Yeowun watched the scene quietly, feeling the joy settle within him. Sharing a meal like this had become something precious. It had been Wang Hul who approached him earlier with the suggestion that they should all at least have dinner together each day. Yeowun had wondered why, thinking everyone would be too occupied with their individual training, but Wang Hul insisted that this was exactly why they needed the gathering. Hobum had agreed, and Wumin added that building camaraderie was just as important as personal growth for those who followed him. Now, as Yeowun sat among them, he understood clearly. Strength was not something he could pursue alone. They all needed to grow together, and this bond between them mattered. Driven by that thought, he had visited the academy supply room the previous day. The instructor there, surprised to see him request such a large amount of paper and writing tools, reminded him that as a captain, he could access whatever supplies he needed. But the instructor grew even more astonished when Yeowun explained that he planned to write martial arts manuals and that the supplies might not be enough. The instructor scratched his head, estimating that the materials could fill at least 60 volumes, and could hardly believe Yeowun had memorized that much. 2 weeks later, Yeowun's followers assembled inside the dorm room. They whispered among themselves, wondering what announcement he planned to make. One of them asked if anyone knew the reason for the gathering, but the others could only say they trusted him enough to wait and follow follow his lead. Mungku watched quietly, sensing that Yeowun had been acting differently these past days. She recalled the night he had returned from the training room with something smeared across his face. When she wiped it away with her handkerchief, he had blushed in embarrassment. She had been amused by his reaction back then, and had not thought deeply about why it happened. Their attention shifted when Yeowun finally arrived, carrying more than 100 books in his arms. The sight shocked everyone. Hobum and Jin-guk hurried forward to help him set the books down. Yeowun then looked over the 34 members gathered before him. He announced that he had brought them together to speak about what lay ahead. Beginning the next day, he would enter isolation training. The statement stunned most of the cadets. They knew that reaching the level required for the 5th test demanded becoming a grandmaster, but none had expected him to commit to seclusion so soon. Wang Hol, who had anticipated this possibility, asked how long Yeowun planned to remain in isolation. Yeowun admitted he had no fixed timeline. 1 year, perhaps 2. He would stay as long as necessary until he was fully satisfied with his progress. Recognizing the determination in Yeowun's eyes, Wang Hul smiled and bowed, expressing his hope that Yeowun would achieve his goal. Baek-ji and the other members followed suit. None of them opposed the idea. Reaching higher levels of mastery required this level of dedication, and they knew that once they passed the 4th test themselves, they too might have to undergo isolation training. Yeowun stated that before he entered isolation, he had 2 orders for all of them. The first was that every one of them must pass the 4th examination before he returned from solitary training. The room stiffened. Jin-guk, Hobum, and Woomin reacted with visible unease, repeating his words in disbelief. Members from low-ranked clans grew nervous as well, but those from high-ranked clans, including the 6 Swords, answered immediately with confidence. Woo Sojung even responded louder than the rest, paying no attention to how it made the others feel. Takim watched him internally with concern, thinking that Sojung's confidence, while natural for someone of his background, would only discourage those from ordinary martial families. The goal was admirable for the entire group, but it would be far more difficult for the weaker members to reach. Yeowun then placed a hand on the large pile of books stacked beside him and delivered his second order. Every member was to master all the manuals he would distribute. The members stared at the books in confusion. Mungku realized that this must have been why Yeowun had come back covered in ink that night. Writing all of these by hand must have been exhausting, and she thought he should have asked for help. Wang Hul and Chae Takim understood something far deeper. Yeowun had copied the master level martial arts from the 4th floor for the sake of the weaker members. He began calling names. Hobum was the first to step forward, brimming with excitement at the thought of receiving a martial arts manual. But instead of a single book, Yeowun handed him 3. Hobum stared at the 3 books in his hands, unable to form a coherent sound. His shock drew every cadet's attention. His fingers trembled as he read the title of the first manual aloud. It was the Sword of Illusion. A wave of disbelief swept through the room. The Sword of Illusion belonged to a high-ranked clan within the demonic cult, and yet Yeowun had copied it by hand for Hobum, and that was only the beginning. When Hobum flipped through the rest, his voice cracked with astonishment. One manual contained the sword techniques of the Fire Mountain clan, and another held the kicks of iron from the Iron clan. Ojong grew frantic, demanding to know what the manuals were, and when the truth came out, he shouted just as loudly as Hobum. Overwhelmed, Hobum dropped to his knees in front of Yeowun. As someone born into a middle-ranked clan, he had never imagined that he would ever touch, let alone learn, master-level martial arts. Tears filled the eyes of the other members, especially those from weaker clans. They had struggled all their lives with limited access to advanced techniques, and now Yeowun had given them opportunities they never dared to dream of. What they did not yet realize was that the remaining 99 handwritten manuals were all completely different from one another. Every member, Hobum, Jin-guk, Machil, and the rest, received a unique technique. All were ascendant master-level arts. Confusion spread among them, especially those who had seen Yeowun browsing only the 2nd and 3rd floors. Sanghwa was as stunned as everyone else. The young lord had been infamous for flipping through manuals in the library so quickly that instructors scolded him endlessly. Yet this revealed something completely different. He had not been careless at all. Wang Hul, still processing the truth, asked whether Yeowun had truly memorized all of those manuals. Yeowun responded with a modest, almost shy grin, admitting that he had. Wang Hul was left speechless before expressing his amazement with genuine admiration. Inwardly, Wang Hul realized the deeper purpose behind Yeowun's actions. The time limits in the library existed to prevent any one person from learning too many techniques. Yet Yeowun had memorized them anyway. The techniques he had shared with the first 5 were from the 6 main sects within the demonic cult. If they could all learn and understand them, they would be able to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of every major clan. Wang Hul had believed he understood Yeowun well, but now he realized he had underestimated him. Yeowun was thinking far beyond what any of them had imagined. The other members members whispered among themselves, astonished that their lord had memorized so many manuals. They spoke in awe, recognizing that the proof of his ability stood before them. One by one, every member stepped forward to take their 3 manuals. As they noticed that each set contained something different, excitement spread. They thanked Yeowun with sincerity, promising not to disappoint him and to train with everything they had. Their enthusiasm filled the room. Munku too felt delighted as she looked over the techniques Yeowun had entrusted to her. When everyone received their manuals, Baekji quietly sent a telepathic message to Yeowun, pointing out a concern. The members from lesser clans, those like Jin Guk, needed proper breathing techniques, even more than martial arts manuals. Without them, they would not be able to develop their energy properly. Before Yeowun could respond, Hobum suddenly shouted in surprise as he flipped through his manual. He had discovered something unexpected inside. He found a breathing technique. The others immediately checked their books, and Jin Guk recognized the same name. Force of mixed origin. More voices followed. Several members had received the same technique. Baekji cleared his throat, realizing his worry had been unnecessary. The 6 swords looked at one another, confused. None of them had ever heard of this breathing method before. Munku examined the technique and quickly realized how astonishing it was. The circulation method moved through pressure points in ways she had never considered, and its efficiency surpassed even the breathing technique of the demonic dragon palm sect. Despite her pride, she had to acknowledge its superiority. Takim attempted to ask where Yeowun had obtained such a technique, but Yeowun stopped him with a cold stare. Takim immediately apologized, recognizing that he had crossed a line. Yeowun then explained that the force of mixed origin was a secret breathing technique hidden on the 4th floor of the library. Takim expressed his amazement, noting that the manual library must truly contain countless hidden treasures. Wang Ho suggested that the breathing technique likely came from a high-ranking sect that had vanished long ago. Yeowun ended the discussion and confirmed that everyone had received their manuals. He ordered them to memorize everything by the next day, and then destroy all the copies afterward. Every member responded with full determination. The following morning, Yeowun rose early and headed toward the Isolation Training Center located northwest of the academy. His followers accompanied him to see him off. Yeowun thanked them, asking the 6 swords to support the members who were still behind in their martial progress. Baekji assured him that they would handle everything and urged him to focus solely on his training. Takim added that teaching others would strengthen their own understanding and he would do his best. Yeowun wished them luck and they bowed deeply, hoping his training would be fruitful. Inside the isolation chamber, Yeowun took a moment to observe the room. It was slightly larger than the adamantine stone training room he had used before. Everything he had requested had been provided, including a large stock of grain balls that could sustain him for years. Standing alone in the quiet space, he felt the weight of his goal. He needed to reach the level of Transcendent Master, yet he still had no idea how to attain it. Yeowun began by instructing Nano to transfer all the Ascendant Master level martial arts from the 4th floor directly into his mind. Nano confirmed the command and began transferring the 245 techniques. While chewing on grain balls, Yeowun organized his thoughts. The techniques he had learned from the high-ranking sects were valuable, but none compared to the dancing butterfly technique, the demonic lord's sword art, or the counter technique. Still, learning such a vast range of martial arts had widened his understanding. He decided to divide each day of training into 3 parts. Mornings would be dedicated to practicing codified fighting forms. Afternoons would be for sparring against avatars through augmented reality. Nights would be reserved for circulating internal energy with breathing techniques. Since it was already afternoon, he chose to begin with sparring. Yeowun instructed Nano to activate augmented reality and set Cheon Yeowun as the avatar. White light filled his vision, blurring into the form of Yeowun. He intended to start with just one avatar and gradually increase the difficulty. His ultimate goal was to face the avatar of Right Guardian Submeng, whose movements he had scanned during the earlier confrontation with the criminal from the force of evil. With that goal in mind, he leapt forward and charged at Yeowun's avatar. This marked the beginning of his long, grueling isolation training. At that moment, no one, not even Yeowun himself, could have predicted just how long that period of isolation would turn out to be. 1 week after Yeowun began his isolation training, Cheon Yeowun, young master of the Shadow Sect, defeated a professor and passed the 4th examination. His achievement placed him second among the cohort, just behind Yeowun's record-breaking performance. On the 10th day, Munku of the demonic Dragon Palm Sect overcame Professor Im and became the 3rd student to pass. It was the first time the academy had ever seen her that happy, thrilled at finally earning a room of her own. The 4th to pass was Chun Kung Won of the Sword Sect. His ambition was to surpass everyone, but his determination not to lose made him overtrain, causing him to take longer than anticipated. 2 months into Yeowun's isolation, both Cheon Yeowun and Cheon Yeowun also entered their own secluded training. Moon-koo felt the need to isolate as well, but she put it aside to help teach martial arts to members of the group who came from lesser sects. Around this time, Baek-ji, Yeowun's first sword, finally passed the 4th examination. His comrades celebrated his achievement, but Baek-ji himself could not shake the frustration of being slower than Moon-koo. 4 months after Yeowun began isolation, Chun Mukum, the young master of the stealth sect, passed the 4th examination and immediately entered seclusion. Soon after, 2 more of Yeowun's 6 swords, Wang Hul and So Jung, also passed. Then came a streak of failures. 5 students were defeated in their attempt to pass the 4th test, and afterward no new challengers stepped forward for quite some time. In the 5th month, the remaining 2 swords, Sanghwa and Takim, successfully passed the examination. By the 6th month, members from lesser sects, Jiaomin, Ojong, Yu Huan, and Jinho Gong managed to reach the early stages of Ascendant Master. By the 10th month, Wumin and Yu Huan succeeded in passing the 4th examination as well. However, by that time, a total of 15 students had already failed. A full year passed while Yeowun remained in isolation. During that time, his followers held a new competition to determine the next 6 swords. The results placed Moon-koo as the first sword, Baek-ji as the 2nd, Wang Hul as the 3rd, Sojung as the 4th, Sanghwa as the 5th, and Takim as the 6th. With new leadership firmly established and over 30% of their comrades reaching the early stages of Ascendant Master, Moon-koo, Baek-ji, and Wang Hul were finally able to begin their own isolation training without worry. 2 years into Yeowun's seclusion, the Academy's 4th examination had nearly run its full course. Out of 120 students, 71 managed to pass. The remainder, unable to meet the standard, were expelled. Among Yeowun's 34 followers, 19 were removed from the Academy, yet those who remained grew stronger. Hobum, who had worked harder than anyone, reached the stage of true Ascendant Master within the 2-year period. With most of the successful students entering isolation training, competition for the 6 swords was skipped entirely that year, leaving the Academy quieter than it had ever been. Aside from Yeowun, the 70 students who underwent isolation eventually completed their training, yet fewer than 40% reached the level of Transcendent Master. The difficulty of the breakthrough became evident, and after 2 years and 4 months, Chun Muyeon of the Shadow Sect became the first to clear the 5th examination, the Sealed Demonic Chamber. Nearly 2 years and 8 months into Yeowun's isolation, more names followed. Chun Kong-won of the Sword Sect, Chuk-sama of the Warrior Dance Sect, Moon-koo of the Demonic Dragon Palm Sect, Wang Hul of the Demon Fist Sect, and Baek-ji of the Pure Kick Sect all passed the 5th examination. That brought the total number of successful challengers to 6. 7 others attempted the trial, but none succeeded. 3 of them died, causing the entire Academy to grow far more cautious of attempting the Sealed Demonic Chamber. On the 3rd year, with many returning from isolation and having drastically improved their skills, another competition for the 6 swords took place. This time, all of Yeowun's followers participated, and the results shifted dramatically. Wang Hul rose as the first sword, Moon-koo became the 2nd, Baek-ji the 3rd, Sanghwa the 4th, Sojung the 5th, and Wumin the 6th. 2 more months slipped by. Winter settled heavily over the Academy, coating the mountains behind the dormitories with snow that fell week after week. In the cold air, several of Yeowun's followers gathered to train together, though not everyone had arrived. Wang Hul noticed the missing faces immediately. Takim pointed out that Moon-koo and Hobum had likely gone to the isolation training rooms again. Baek-ji sighed, realizing they had made yet another visit there. Sanghwa, however, was relieved that at least the 2 of them were moving around together rather than wandering alone. Even so, Wang Hul remained uneasy. He acknowledged that it was only the 2 of them together, and something about it worried him. Baek-ji reminded him that Moon-koo was an incredibly skilled fighter, questioning why Wang Hul felt so concerned. Wang Hul explained that he wished he could ignore the feeling, but the competition for the minor priesthood was escalating, and tensions among the sects were rising. He mentioned that Kong-won had made another offer to Baek-ji in the cafeteria recently. Baek-ji was baffled that Wang Hul would even bring it up. He assured him he would never consider joining Kong-won. Wang Hul clarified that it wasn't a matter of trust, he simply feared what schemes Kong-won might attempt. Takim agreed with Wang Hul, noting that Kong-won was no different from Yu-chan. Both were snakes who relied on underhanded tricks. Baek-ji added that this was the very reason they always moved around in a group. Still, Wang Hul admitted that he had a bad feeling about the day. He urged them to go retrieve Moon-koo and Hobum before anything happened. The group headed out immediately. Meanwhile, at the northwestern corner of the academy, in front of the closed isolation training rooms, more than 20 cadets gathered in a threatening circle. At the center stood Mun-ku and Hobom. Wang Hul's fear had turned into reality. The one who had gathered these 20 cadets was none other than Cheon Yeowun. Hobom demanded to know why Yeowun had brought armed cadets here. Yeowun brushed him aside, stating that he had no interest in dealing with him. His focus was entirely on Mun-ku. He asked her once more to reconsider his offer. Mun-ku refused firmly, repeating that she already served a lord and saw no reason to join him. Yeowun unsheathed his sword with a cold smirk. In his view, acquiring a useful subordinate required effort. He proposed a duel. If Mun-ku won, he would let her leave. If he won, she would become his follower. Hobom protested, declaring that the challenge was far too unreasonable even for someone competing for the minor priesthood. Yeowun glared at him, clenching his teeth, harshly reminding him that he had already told him to leave and that he did not care about anything he had to say. Yeowun motioned with his hand, and 3 cadets immediately rushed toward Hobom. Hobom bit down in frustration and prepared to counter with the Sword of Illusion. But before he could strike, all 3 attackers froze in place. Their bodies halted mid-movement as if time itself had stopped around them. They strained against the unseen force, but even when they poured internal energy into their limbs, they could not budge. A powerful invisible pressure pinned them down. Yeowun snapped in anger, demanding to know what they were doing. But before his men could respond, the 3 cadets were hurled backward as though an invisible giant had grabbed them. They crashed across the ground like discarded debris, groaning in pain. Every cadet present felt the overwhelming force that had swept through the air. That was when Mun-ku and Hobom shouted at the same time, voices full of shock and relief. It was Cheon Yeowun. He stepped forward with long black hair flowing to his waist, his features sharper and more mature than before. His pale complexion, an effect of long isolation, only sharpened the cold edge in his expression. The cadets who had been thrown stared in disbelief. He had used nothing but internal power to move them, telekinetic force so refined it pierced through the air like an invisible hand. Only a master at the highest realms could use wall-piercing telekinesis. Realization crashed over them. If he could move solid objects with pure internal energy, then Yeowun had surpassed the level of transcendent master. Yeowun's thoughts spiraled as he clenched his teeth. The possibility that Yeowun had reached the realm of Genesis Master terrified him, but he refused to believe it. It had taken him 2 entire years just to reach Transcendent Master. Accepting Yeowun's advancement would crush his pride. He tried to convince himself it was some trick, some illusion, or sleight of hand, but regardless of the truth, he could not back down now. Walking away would ruin his reputation and make him appear weak before everyone. Yeowun, unwilling to retreat, shouted for his men to attack. His followers obeyed instantly, drawing their weapons as they charged forward. Mun-ku and Hobom rushed in as well, refusing to stand by while a group ambush took place. Hobom called out the cowardice of the tactic just as Sim Jin-gu, the strongest among Yeowun's subordinates, lunged at him. Hobom braced himself, intent on holding Jin-gu back so Yeowun could face the rest more easily. Their swords clashed with explosive force, pushing Jin-gu backward through sheer impact. Yeowun himself targeted Mun-ku. His arm flashed with sword chi, striking with rapid, precise movements. Mun-ku countered with equal ferocity, blocking and avoiding his blows while trying to maintain her ground. Meanwhile, the remaining 15 cadets rushed toward Yeowun. One of Yeowun's followers, Kingpo, sensed something was wrong. Yeowun was far too calm. His suspicion was confirmed when Yeowun raised his hand slightly. Instantly, 3 cadets were lifted off the ground as if an invisible force seized them. Their bodies rose helplessly into the air. With a simple forward motion of Yeowun's hand, the lifted cadets shot toward the charging group like human projectiles. The attackers tried to brace for impact, but the force behind the thrown bodies was overwhelming. They were struck by the powerful internal energy infused into Yeowun's movement, sending them tumbling across the snow. 6 of the 18 cadets were incapacitated immediately, coughing blood and unable to rise. Kingpo realized the truth in an instant. They were utterly outmatched. Fear rippled through the group as Yeowun took a single step forward, and every cadet flinched. None of them could imagine defeating him, even with their prince leading them. Kingpo knew continuing would be suicide. He shouted to Yeowun that they had lost and needed to retreat, but Yeowun's cold stare froze him in place. Desperate, Kingpo tried to warn Yeowun that pressing them further would corner them into fighting to the death, implying that even Yeowun might be harmed if they were pushed that far. But he couldn't finish his threat. Yeowun appeared before him faster than anyone could follow. Kingpo attempted to swing, but he was far too slow. Bam! Yeowun's fist struck his chest with a crushing impact. The sound of bones collapsing echoed as Kingpo was launched backward, his body thrown off the grid with without slowing for even an instant. A Grandmaster level warrior had been defeated by a single punch, an impossible sight. The cadets froze in terror. Yeowun's cold gaze swept over them as he declared that the rest were next. Meanwhile, Kungwon was locked in battle with Moon-koo. Despite fighting her with more than 20 formations, he still couldn't overpower her. Rage and disbelief twisted through him. Moon-koo was small in stature compared to most men, yet the power of the demonic Dragon Palm sect flowed through her fists, turning every strike into a force he could barely withstand. Moon-koo staggered as her internal energy faded, her breathing growing unsteady. Kungwon watched her weaken and sneered inwardly, believing this result was her fault for refusing him. Gathering every bit of his strength, he infused his sword with energy until it glowed with a sharp blue radiance. Moon-koo saw the brilliant light and instinctively stepped back. She closed her eyes, bracing for the strike she knew she could not block. When she opened them again to peek, she froze in disbelief. Yeowun stood between them. He had appeared in an instant and was gripping Kungwon's sword with his bare hand. Kungwon stared at him in shock. He tried to yank the sword free, but it would not move at all, not even an inch. Panic surged through him as he realized the truth he had been denying. Yeowun's strength was far beyond anything he understood. Before he could think further, the blade cracked. Then it shattered completely in Yeowun's hand. A moment later, searing agony shot through Kungwon's arm. His right hand burst open with blood as the broken fragments and internal force rebounded against him. He screamed in terror and writhed on the ground. Yeowun stepped forward and brought his foot down, pinning Kungwon in place as he rolled in pain. His cold voice cut through the winter air. He stated that Kungwon would pay for reaching greedily towards something that was never his to take. Kungwon's face turned pale. Frightened beyond reason, he begged for mercy, but Yeowun's expression did not waver. He struck him across the face with crushing force, ignoring every plea. It was too late for begging. A few minutes later, the rest of Yeowun's group arrived, and what they found left them speechless. 19 injured cadets lay collapsed in a single pile, their limbs twisted or snapped. Standing beside them was a young man wearing a blue bandana, calmly dragging the defeated bodies together as if cleaning up after a training session. Wang-ho stared in disbelief. Woman froze beside him, unable to understand what they were seeing. They had rushed over with a sense of dread, but nothing had prepared them for this. Then their eyes caught sight of Moon-koo. She was standing before a pale, long-haired young man, talking to him with excitement and relief. Recognition struck Wang-hul and Woman at the same time. It was their lord, Cheon Yeowun. Wang-hul sprinted forward and dropped to one knee without hesitation. He bowed deeply, announcing himself as first sword. Moon-koo quickly knelt as well, declaring herself as second sword. Baekji approached next. He did not kneel. Sweat gathered at his temples as he stared at Yeowun, who stood there radiating an internal force so dense and overwhelming that even a transcendent master like Baekji felt pressure crushing down on him. Inside, Baekji understood exactly what he was sensing. He had reached Transcendent Master himself, yet Yeowun's presence felt almost identical to when the Academy deputy stood before him. The difference between their strengths was immeasurable. Baekji finally dropped to one knee, introducing himself as the third sword and welcoming Yeowun back with full respect. Sanghwa laughed, noting that she had never seen Baekji display proper etiquette before. He used to insist he couldn't bring himself to speak with honorifics. She then knelt as well, declaring herself the fourth sword. One by one, all 6 swords bowed, followed by the rest of Yeowun's followers. Their voices echoed in unison as they welcomed him. Yeowun smiled and thanked them for waiting for him. A cheer erupted, full of relief and admiration. Wang-hul then pointed toward the badly injured man on the ground and asked who he was. Moon-koo answered that it was Cheon Kung-won of the Sword Clan. Wang-hul's shock deepened at the realization. He stammered as he asked the question everyone feared to voice, whether Yeowun had reached the level of Genesis Master. Yeowun turned back toward them and gave a simple, confident nod. Half an hour later in the infirmary, Dr. Baek Jung-meng smiled to himself as he heard the news, muttering that Yeowun had finally emerged. Word spread through the academy with the speed of wildfire. News of Yeowun's return from isolation and the overwhelming defeat of the sword sect's Cheon Kung-won and his group shook the entire student body. Yeowun had personally eliminated 5 of the 6 candidates for the minor priesthood from the main 6 sects. For the first time, students began to wonder if someone outside the main sects might claim the minor priesthood. This growing speculation placed heavy pressure on Cheon Muyan of the Shadow Sect, but Muyan paid little attention to the rumors or expectations. His focus remained solely on mastering his martial arts, indifferent to the tension spreading across the academy. At the chief's office in the main building, Lee Ha-meng listened as an instructor reported Yeowun's return. When the instructor stated that Yeowun had reached the level of Genesis Master, Ha-meng's reaction was immediate. idiot. He repeated the rank in disbelief, stunned that such a thing could even be suggested, but the instructor did not waver. He explained that he had personally witnessed Yeowun using wall-piercing telekinesis when escorting him out of the isolation chamber. Hameng's thoughts raced. Yeowun had stayed in isolation far longer than expected, and Hameng had assumed the young man would emerge as an ultimate transcendent master at best. But Genesis Master? No student in the long history of the Demonic Academy had ever reached that level before passing the 6th examination. It defied every record, every projection, and every assumption of natural talent. Then something else struck Hameng. His eyes widened, and the instructor immediately asked if something was wrong. Hameng realized the truth. What he had felt moments before was real. A tremendous presence had extended across the entire building, a pressure that only someone at the level of Genesis Master could release. And now, that same person was knocking on the door. He instructed the guard to let him in. Hameng reflected internally that if he had not just learned of Yeowun's breakthrough, he might have mistaken that energy for one of the elders. Such overwhelming force was enough to envelop the academy itself. When Yeowun entered, Hameng approached him, genuinely intrigued. The young man had grown so much that he was almost unrecognizable from the cadet he had once been. Hameng asked why he had come. Yeowun bowed respectfully and stated his intention clearly. He wished to take the 5th examination. The instructors guided Yeowun toward the northernmost corner of the academy, where the entrance to the sealed demonic chamber waited. Jin Chang, one of the overseeing instructors, eyed him with a mix of awe and disbelief. Only 4 hours had passed since Yeowun emerged from isolation, and yet he was already standing before the 5th examination. Jin Chang commented on Yeowun's haste, but Yeowun explained calmly that during his time away, many of his followers had already passed this test. He wanted to challenge it as soon as possible to stand alongside them. Jin Chang silently marveled at the young man before him. It had taken Jin Chang 3 years of harsh training to reach the level of ultimate transcendent master, and yet Yeowun had surpassed even that level. The reality of it left him astounded. Jin Chang opened the worn wooden door, and a wave of frigid air spilled out from within. Yeowun entered, finding himself at the top of a staircase that descended into a dark, shadowed tunnel. The air was still, the atmosphere heavy with the presence of countless traps. One instructor pressed against the wooden pillar beside the stairs, activating the chamber's mechanisms. Jin Chang explained the rules. Yeowun needed only to make his way through the sealed demonic chamber using his energy as his guide. They would wait at the exit to the east for 2 hours. If Yeowun failed to emerge within that time, they would assume something had gone wrong and deactivate the traps. Jin Chang then declared the beginning of the 5th examination. The sealed demonic chamber, known as the place where a demonic specter had once been sealed, became completely dark as soon as the instructor stepped out and shut the door. The silence was absolute. Normally, a challenger would rely on pure senses to navigate the maze of death traps hidden inside, but Yeowun had no need for guesswork. He ordered Nano to activate night vision, and his sight immediately shifted. The pitch-black interior brightened into clear clarity, revealing a long staircase descending deep underground. The air carried a stench that clung to the stone walls. A foul mixture of oil, dried blood, and several unidentifiable odors blended into something thick and nauseating. Yeowun pushed forward, following the faint breeze that indicated the path toward the exit. The corridor walls were unnaturally smooth, showing it had been carved by hand rather than formed naturally. Traps had clearly been installed throughout, but Yeowun didn't slow down. He could already see the route ahead clearly with Nano's enhanced vision. He launched forward using a swift running technique, but the moment his foot left the ground, the chamber reacted. The walls vibrated, triggering the first mechanism. Rows of sharp spears shot toward him with lethal force. Yeowun merely lifted his hand. The spears snapped into fragments the instant they touched the invisible force radiating from him, scattering across the stone floor long before they could reach him. Yeowun recognized immediately that without sufficient martial skill, a challenger would be killed instantly in the darkness. The traps were far too sensitive and lethal. Deciding not to rely on movement techniques, he continued forward on foot. A few steps later, another mechanism activated. The stone he stepped on sank down, and the ceiling 10 paces around him dropped in a crushing sweep. Yeowun dashed clear of the collapsing section before it struck, then slowed his pace. With careful observation, he began identifying the pressure points and trigger stones throughout the tunnel. 30 minutes passed before multiple branching tunnels appeared. He continued without hesitation, guided by the faint breeze ahead. But then, a sudden realization struck him. He had seen this layout before. His steps slowed as memory rose to the surface. The structure before him mirrored the secret chamber beneath the detention center from 3.5 years ago. The present blurred as the past resurfaced with startling clarity. He had dropped to his knees as a quiet sense of gratitude settled in in his chest. He offered a respectful bow, thanking the demonic lord for guiding him to this hidden place. He knew that if the odd poison staff ever learned of this, the man would be consumed with envy and rage. And he also knew what he must do next: eliminate all traces of the demonic lord's sword art and its explanatory texts. Such a rare treasure could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. The floor trembled from the force with which he knelt, and Yeowun stepped back as the ceiling shook. Cracks formed, and glowing orbs began falling to the ground one by one. When the dust settled, 24 orbs lay scattered around him. He picked one up. Inside was the explanatory text for a form of the demonic lord's sword art. He wondered whether there had been a hidden mechanism here designed to release them under specific conditions. Turning the orb, he noticed a series of small raised lines etched on its surface. After collecting all 24 orbs and aligning the lines in sequence, they formed a complete image, a map. It appeared to be a treasure map, though its exact nature was unclear. With Nano's help, he scanned and saved the entire map. Then, ensuring no one else would ever uncover this secret, he crushed each glowing orb beneath his foot until nothing remained. The memory faded as the present rushed back into focus. Now standing once more within the living tunnels, Yeowun called upon Nano to display the reconstructed map. Nano reported that the markings aligned perfectly with the current structure of the cave. Yeowun felt a rush of certainty. The orbs had formed a treasure map of the sealed demonic chamber itself. Nano then projected their exact position based on the coordinates. Impressed, Yeowun remarked that he had not known Nano could perform such precise mapping. He decided he would need to backtrack through the chamber to reach the destination. There was still time left, and he believed the demonic lord would never hide something like this without purpose. He needed to learn what lay at the marked point. As he moved deeper, the traps grew far more frequent and complex than those on the path toward the exit. At one point, he paused. A faint sound echoed through the tunnel. He recalled Munku's earlier words, how she said the chamber was frightening not because of the darkness, but because of the cries of something within. Baek Ji had confirmed he had heard it as well. Now Yeowun heard it too. The cry was far too clear to dismiss as imagination, yet even with his senses sharpened through internal energy, he could not detect any living presence nearby. He continued forward carefully, navigating past the hidden mechanisms. Eventually, he reached the location indicated on the map. A massive blue wall blocked the path. Its surface was carved entirely with large characters. The treasure map had led directly to this point, yet the way forward was completely sealed shut. Yeowun stepped closer and examined the enormous letters carved into the wall. From this distance, the writing was difficult to read, but the strokes were unmistakable. They had been carved with a sword, and they carried the same style, weight, and destructive precision as the markings on the sapphire pedestals. It was the handwriting of the demonic lord. The eerie cry echoed again from beyond the wall, deeper this time, vibrating faintly through the stone. Yeowun's thoughts sharpened. He sensed a vicious demonic presence sealed beyond the sapphire wall. One wrong move could unleash something uncontrollable. Perhaps this was why the place carried the name Sealed Demonic Chamber, but the demonic lord himself had marked this location on the treasure map. Yeowun felt certainty settle into him. If this was the demonic lord's arrangement, it could not be something meant to harm him. He decided to break through. Drawing a long breath, he stepped toward the wall and unsheathed his blade. Force chi wrapped around the metal, glowing and dense. He struck. His blade hit repeatedly with tremendous force, each impact cracking the air. Dust and debris burst upward, filling the chamber until nothing was visible. Yeowun swept his arm, and a surge of energy blasted outward like a gusting storm, clearing the dust. His eyes narrowed. The sapphire wall stood completely intact. Only shallow blade marks scraped its surface, far weaker than the deep strokes left by Chunma. The realization stunned him. Nano then confirmed the truth. The wall's hardness was identical to sapphire. In fact, it wasn't just similar, it was sapphire, disguised beneath a different outer material. Yeowun inhaled slowly. Only one method remained. He would need to unleash a sword formation powerful enough to shatter through sapphire. He lowered his stance and the air began to twist. Wind spiraled violently around him as the pressure of his internal force grew. With a step forward, he unleashed all 24 movements of the formation at once, condensed into a single devastating strike. The explosion shook the entire cave. The shockwave roared outward, coating everything in a blinding cloud of dust. Yeowun swept his hand downward and the swirling dust collapsed to the floor. A massive hole had been blasted clean through the sapphire wall, but the moment he stepped toward it, a foul stench washed over him. The exact same nauseating odor he'd smelled at the chamber's entrance. A heavy unease seeped into him. He wondered if breaking the seal had been a mistake. Before he could think further, the blade in his hand cracked. The metal disintegrated into dust, unable to endure the force he had pushed through the formation. In that instant, Nano Nano's urgent voice echoed in his mind. Nano detected an erratic surge of plasma-like energy rushing toward him, like a violent discharge in the atmosphere. Yeowun barely had time to react before a blinding light flared. A massive force slammed into him. He was thrown violently backward, crashing into the stone wall behind him. For a moment, he stared in disbelief. Something had struck him head on, and he hadn't even seen it move. Another growl echoed from the darkness beyond the shattered sapphire. This time, Yeowun leapt aside. A shadow shot past him, smashing into the wall where he had just been standing, sending fragments of stone scattering. A gigantic silhouette flickered through the dim light. Its size, its presence, its killing intent, none of it felt human. As the creature moved into clearer view, Yeowun finally saw it. A massive serpent, its black scales gleaming with a sickly sheen, reeking of rotted blood. Its bloodshot eyes glared with murderous instinct, and its head was large enough to match the size of a full-grown human. A cold realization stabbed through him. He was staring at an Imugi serpent. Yeowun's thoughts raced. Imugi serpents were said to be holy creatures, white or blue-scaled beings that dwelled in lakes, revered in legends. But the thing lunging at him now was nothing like that. Yeowun shot up along the cave wall using his movement technique, narrowly avoiding the venomous fangs. They slammed into the ground with such force that the stone shattered instantly. Frustration burned in him. He had broken the sapphire seal believing it would reveal a treasure left behind by the demonic lord, only to awaken a creature sealed here for a reason. The entire cavern trembled. If the serpent continued rampaging inside the narrow passage, the cave might collapse. And if the deeper chamber was also carved from sapphire, the creature would be trapped behind the wall with him. There would be no room to escape, and he needed space to get away from the collapsing corridor. He decided to lure it into the sapphire room. Yeowun sprinted along the wall, weaving through the cavern's curves. The serpent's immense body coiled and twisted, following him with relentless hunger. When it turned fully to pursue him, its colossal frame pushed through the broken opening, spilling into the chamber like a massive black tide. As soon as the gap cleared, Yeowun kicked off the wall and dashed into the inner room. Water covered the ground up to his knees, thick with a foul stench so strong it stabbed at his temples. Before he could analyze what this liquid was, the serpent burst into the chamber. Its massive head lunged through the hole. Yeowun jumped, but the clinging, sticky sludge dragged at his legs, slowing him just enough that his usual running speed couldn't manifest. Yeowun shifted his stance. If escape was impossible, then the only path left was to face the creature head on. He gathered force chi into his hand and unleashed the full might of the third formation of the sword force of the Sky Demon. All 24 movements erupted at once, creating a violent storm of sword chi that tore through the humid air and struck the serpent's massive body. But the moment his attack landed, Yeowun heard something impossible. The sharp ringing clang of metal. The serpent writhed and roared in fury, and the shock of its movement blasted Yeowun backward before he could complete the formation. He crashed into the sticky water below. His thoughts raced. Even the third formation of the demonic lord's sword art hadn't been enough to scratch the creature. The sensation when he struck it was like hitting reinforced steel. Its body was harder than sapphire, but something else disturbed him even more. As the colossal serpent moved and lunged toward him, the water around its massive bulk did not shift at all. The surface remained completely still, rising no higher than his knees. That was impossible. If such a gigantic creature entered the water, it should have displaced enough to splash across the chamber. Yet the water didn't budge. A realization sparked. He commanded Nano to activate augmented reality. White lines formed over his vision, outlining the creature and the chamber, but something was wrong. There was no physical mass registered beside the serpent. Instead, only a numerical reading indicating energy flow appeared, paired with a single symbol resembling a moving wave. He asked Nano what the symbol represented. Nano explained that it was a graph measuring dark plasma energy saturating the entire chamber, plasma energy growing at abnormal, unstable rates, a phenomenon many would call a spiritual encounter. The serpent before him was not a physical beast. It was a manifestation of condensed destructive energy. Yeowun murmured in disbelief that this was a spiritual encounter, and Nano immediately issued another warning. An atmospheric sprite phenomenon was approaching. The dragon serpent lunged again, and Yeowun kicked upward with twice the force, tearing free from the sticky sludge just in time to avoid the snapping jaws. As he evaded, the illusion wavered slightly, and he noticed it again. The serpent had no physical weight. Its movement created no displacement in the water, and even its shadow did not behave naturally. He asked Nano to confirm what he was seeing. Nano reported that 24 metal fragments were floating in the air, each radiating intense plasma energy. It wasn't seeing a serpent at all. Yeowun commanded Nano to mark their positions. Red dots appeared in his augmented vision. Something clicked instantly. The placement of every red dot matched the exact strike points of the 24 sword movements of the sword force of the Sky Demon, as though the demonic lord had designed those fragments intentionally to respond to that formation. Realization spread through Yeowun. This monster, and the illusion guarding the chamber, was built to be defeated only by someone who had mastered all 24 movements perfectly. Yeowun centered his breath, feeling his internal energy flow in perfect sync with the sword art he had trained endlessly for 3 years. He had repeated the basic form of the demonic lord's sword art thousands of times, merging it seamlessly with the breathing technique until both operated as one. He exhaled sharply, his body blurred, splitting into 24 afterimages as he shot forward. Each trace moved with lethal precision, striking every red point simultaneously. Metallic impacts rang out across the chamber, echoing in a rapid chain of sharp collisions. The dragon serpent's illusion exploded outward. Its massive form surged past him as the projected image was pierced from within. Yeowun dropped to the ground through the fading body of the beast, its image dissolving into scattered light. He realized instantly that he had succeeded. He turned back toward the center of the room. Suspended in the air were the 24 black metal fragments, trembling with unstable energy. They hovered for a brief moment, then began pulling toward each other. Piece by piece, they snapped into alignment. The fragments merged, their shapes interlocking until a single object floated before him. A sword, dark, ominous metal shaped into the form of a blade, glowing faintly as if alive. It hung in the air in front of him, radiating a power unlike anything he had felt before. Yeowun approached slowly, stunned by the sight. As the blade turned slightly in the air, he caught sight of the characters engraved along its side. Sky Demon Sword. The name engraved on the blade left Yeowun stunned. The Sky Demon Sword was known throughout the demonic cult as the personal weapon of the cult lord, a divine symbol of absolute authority. Yeowun reached out and grasped it. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, a torrent of dark energy poured into him. It surged like a living force, flooding every corner of his body. He tried to release the sword, but the energy overpowered his muscles, dragging him deeper. A strangled groan escaped him as the darkness swallowed him whole. Everything disappeared. He could no longer feel his body. He tried to speak. No sound came out. He tried to listen. There was only silence. But the darkness did not terrify him. It enveloped him like warm water, comforting and gentle, as if he were floating in a womb. His thoughts began to soften under its embrace, drifting towards surrender. He nearly gave in, but a spark of clarity ignited, and he wrenched himself back to awareness. He refused to be consumed. The darkness collapsed instantly, sucked inward until nothing remained. The world around him shifted. Suddenly, Yeowun stood in a vast white expanse. The ground shimmered like water beneath his feet, rippling with each breath he took. He called for Nano, but there was no response. He was alone in a realm beyond physical reality. A tremor rippled through the space, then something erupted upward from behind him. A towering serpent with pearl-white scales gleaming like polished jade. Its body stretched endlessly, far larger than the black serpent from before. Twin horns curved from its head, radiating holy energy. A true Amugi serpent. Yeowun whispered the realization aloud. The creature lifted its head and released a roar that reverberated across the entire realm. Its scales writhed and its body swelled, expanding with every breath. The horns lengthened, sharpening as if preparing to shed the final barrier toward becoming a real dragon. As it surged upward, another presence flashed through the realm. A figure dashed toward the ascending serpent, blade unsheathed in a blur of light. Yeowun jolted with shock. Someone else was here. A blade spun through the air like a black comet and struck the white serpent's horn. A sharp slicing sound echoed across the realm. The Amugi serpent shrieked in agony. Its massive body writhed violently, and Yeowun saw why. The horn had been severed. The pearl-white scales darkened in an instant, turning pitch black. Its once holy yellow eyes burned red with rage, and a man stepped forward beneath the falling fragments of the horn. Yeowun's breath halted. The man wore a black robe, and in his hand was the exact same sword. The serpent roared and rushed at the robed man, its enormous form twisting in fury. That was when the man lifted his sword. Dark force chi erupted from the blade in a wave so deep and ominous that Yeowun had never witnessed anything like it. The man dashed forward with terrifying speed, his sword slicing through space. He unleashed a storm of sword movements, a formation Yeowun recognized instantly. The man passed by the serpent in a single fluid motion. The serpent's head erupted into fragments, shattered cleanly into countless pieces. Dark blood surged upward and splashed across the water-like surface, staining the world in black. The man then plunged the Sky Demon sword downward into the severed remains. A surge of black energy rose like smoke, then funneled into the blade. The sword drank the essence greedily. The man regarded his sword and murmured that the process would take time, and that the energy wasn't meant for him. Then he turned. His eyes met Yeowun's. The world warped instantly. Everything spun, distorting, collapsing, and Yeowun felt himself pulled violently out of the white realm. He jolted awake with a nauseating stench flooding his senses. His body was half submerged in the foul black ooze. He choked and coughed, trying not to vomit as he realized he'd swallowed some of it. The taste was so revolting that his body convulsed. Nano's voice echoed with concern, asking if he was alright. Yeowun immediately questioned how long he had been unconscious. Nano explained that he hadn't been unconscious in the ordinary sense. He had simply fainted the moment he grabbed the sword. To Yeowun, it had felt like a long trance, but Nano clarified that less than an hour had passed since he entered the cave. Relief washed over him. At least he hadn't lost much time. But Nano continued. The instant Yeowun had grabbed the sword, dark plasma energy had surged into his body. In that brief moment, the stimulation to his brain had reached 100%, and the plasma had merged directly with his internal energy. Yeowun trembled as he stared down at his hands. The integration explained everything. The sinister demonic aura he felt inside himself, the unsettling sensation clinging to his chi. All of it came from that black sword. He tried to recall what the sword had done to him. Before he could process further, something caught his eye. He lifted both arms and froze. Black metal wrapped around his wrists. Two arm guards made of the very pieces that had formed the Sky Demon's sword. They clung to him like living metal. He tried to remove them, but they would not budge. They were fused to him, as if they had become part of his body. At the entrance of the Demon Seal Cave, 3 instructors waited at the exit. They had been standing guard, anticipating Yeowun's arrival, unaware of the phenomenon that had just unfolded deep beneath the academy. Instructor Yun commented on how strange the situation had become. With Yeowun already at the level of Genesis Master, he should have crossed the chamber easily in under an hour. Another instructor grew uneasy, noting that nearly 2 hours had passed. They wondered aloud if something had gone wrong inside. Jin Chang stared quietly at the stone pedestal marking the cave's entrance, lost in thought. The sealed demonic chamber was said to contain a bound demon, and since the founding of the academy, this place had been chosen as the 5th examination site. Only those deemed worthy had ever been able to enter its depths. Jin Chang wondered whether Yeowun's long delay meant he had faced something extraordinary, perhaps something only a truly chosen candidate could encounter. Just as their allotted time approached its limit, the old wooden door creaked open. Cheon Yeowun appeared. A wave of foul stench hit the instructors instantly. They flinched and covered their noses on instinct. Yeowun emerged drenched in dark, sticky sludge, the odor so overwhelming that even Jin Chang, usually composed, visibly recoiled. Jin Chang forced himself to speak and offered formal congratulations for passing the 5th examination. Yeowun returned the gesture with thanks, still exhausted from the ordeal. As Jin Chang steadied himself, his eyes drifted to Yeowun's hand. Something pale and oddly shaped was clutched in his grip. It resembled a white club, like an immature deer antler, strangely smooth and out of place among the filth. Yeowun had originally been required to report to the chief immediately after passing the 5th test, but the stench covering his body was so severe that he was sent to the dorm to wash first. It took him an entire hour of scrubbing before the foul odor finally faded. When he finished, he twisted his clothes, forcing out the thick black liquid and gathering all of it into a bowl. His thoughts drifted back to the moment he had received the black sword inside the demonic seal cave. He remembered how his force chi had no longer been blue. Just like the figure he had seen in his illusion, his own force chi had turned dark, carrying an ominous aura with it. He had swung the black sword while channeling that dark force chi toward the wall, and the wall had shattered and collapsed as if it were nothing. He had inwardly acknowledged the weapon's frightening nature, recognizing that it was already astonishing for the sword to withstand the demonic lord's sword art. Yet on top of that, it had produced a manifestation of sword energy powerful enough to slice through sapphire as easily as soft tofu. The ominous energy had eventually faded, and the black sword had disintegrated into the air. Yeowun had lifted both arms to inspect them. Startled by what he saw, he realized he had applied both his internal strength and sheer physical force, yet nothing had moved. It became clear to him that the reaction only occurred when demonic energy fused with his own internal energy. More pressing than that, however, was the heat spreading through his body, accompanied by an overwhelming surge of sweat. Nano explained that the viscous liquid absorbed into Yeowun's body had been circulating through his meridian channels, forcing out the final traces of toxins that still lingered within him. Yeowun was shocked at the realization. He had believed that reaching the level of Genesis Master had completely purified his body, leaving no impurities behind. Yet this liquid had cleansed even the smallest, most untraceable remnants. As he thought further, he recalled that the black liquid was supposed to be the blood of the Amugi serpent. The possibility that it could greatly benefit his followers immediately came to mind, and he decided to take some with him. After filling his scabbard with the liquid, he glanced around the room, noting how much more remained. He planned to return for it. While exiting, his foot struck something hidden beneath the surface of the liquid. Curious, he reached down and pulled it free. The floor around the object collapsed in an instant, forcing him to leap out of the stone chamber. The sudden collapse drew in all of the black liquid, leaving the room dry. Yeowun acknowledged that he had managed to collect enough liquid in his sheath to help his followers, yet he felt the loss sharply, recognizing how much strength it could have provided to the entire demonic cult. He now turns his attention to the white object in his hand. At first, he was unsure of its nature, but he soon recognized it as the severed horn of the white dragon serpent he had seen in his illusion. Uncertain of its purpose, he wondered if consuming it might enhance his internal power. As he held the horn, Nano began its analysis. Nano reported that the horn was composed of materials absent from its database, making further analysis impossible. It identified only that the horn's hardness sat just below that of the hardest diamond. Yeowun was stunned by the revelation. The thought that it exceeded the hardness of sapphire pushed him to test it with his own sword energy. He summoned Blue Force Chi over his finger and struck the horn. The attack left no mark. Instead, the horn produced a slight deflection that pushed the Force Chi back. The unexpected resilience sparked an idea in his mind. If it could endure that force, then it was likely capable of withstanding both the demonic lord's sword art and the dancing butterfly technique. He considered forging it into a sword or saber, confident that blacksmith Sunong, descendant of the legendary Yezi-U, might be able to handle such a material. Moments later, Yeowun made his way to the main building of the academy. Lee Ha-meng observed him closely, noticing how drastically his energy had strengthened in only 4 hours. He sensed Yeowun's heightened control, but also detected a strange demonic presence intertwined with that power. The old tale about only the worthy encountering the hidden demon of the sealed demonic chamber resurfaced in his mind, and he found himself wondering if Professor Ho had been right all along. A cough from Ho Jin Chang pulled him from his thoughts. Ha-meng acknowledged Yeowun and addressed him with his new title, recognizing his success in the 5th examination. He presented a golden medal engraved with the letter M, marking his status as a true martial arts master of the cult. Jin Chang then handed him a small wooden box containing the Black Dragon Ball and an additional item, a dagger forged from dark iron, gifted to all individuals who attained the rank of Warden. The engraving on the weapon read, Demonic Warrior Cult, and a sharp sword energy radiated from the carved letters. It was clear that the engraving had been made not by a mere artisan, but by a true swordmaster. Jin Chang explained that the engraving on the dagger had been personally carved by the patriarch himself, marking it as an honorable gift bestowed only upon the wardens of the cult. Yeowun, however, felt nothing but disdain for the item. He wished he could discard it immediately, yet with so many eyes fixed on him, he forced himself to remain composed and wait for a better moment. To conceal his thoughts, he shifted the topic and asked to be informed about the 6th test. Lee Ha-meng responded with a grin, affirming that Yeowun was more than qualified to attempt it. The instructors were filled with excitement. The 6th examination required a cadet to be at least at the level of Genesis Master, and none of them had ever witnessed someone reach that threshold within their tenure. Yeowun was the first candidate to qualify in 70 years, an achievement that left even the long-serving Ho Jin Chang astonished. Ha-meng explained that the 6th examination involved challenging one of the 12 elders, the most powerful martial arts masters of the cult. He asked if Yeowun had a specific elder in mind. Yeowun remained silent before requesting time to consider his choice, and Ha-meng agreed. As everyone departed, Ha-meng stayed behind, holding the silver medal Yeowun had once returned. He reflected on how much Yeowun had grown. He had expected the young warden to immediately choose the chief of the poison sect, driven by the grudge stemming from Lady Hua's death. The chance to openly challenge the target of his vengeance was right before him, yet Yeowun still chose to think carefully. Even so, Ha-meng knew the chief of the poison sect was far too lethal to be confronted purely for personal revenge. Yeowun's 4 years of protection within the academy were nearly over, and the 6 sects were likely to strike first with sharpened intent to kill. When that time came, the cult would be thrown into bloody chaos. The looming question weighed heavily in Ha-meng's mind. How would Yeowun face what awaited him? Meanwhile, Yeowun made his way back to the manual library. He considered the revelation that the 6th examination required challenging one of the 12 elders. Regardless of the difficulty, he knew the confrontation with the 6 sects would begin the moment he left the academy. This test simply offered him the chance to eliminate one of their leading figures in advance. When weighing the potential gains and losses, bosses, he concluded that the best way to ensure victory over the Sixth Sex was to master the final codified fighting form of the demonic lord's sword art. Lost in thought, he reached the 5th floor of the manual library. Only about 20 books were kept there, and among them was the one he already knew well, the Butterfly Blade Dance. As the Right Guardian Submeng had proudly claimed, its presence on the 5th floor showed the technique's depth and power. To Yeowun, it meant one less book to study. What he sought now was the long-awaited final form of the demonic lord's sword art. In the center of the room stood a single sapphire stone pedestal. Yeowun approached it with anticipation and instructed Nano to scan the poem inscribed on the front and analyze the chi circulation technique. Once the scan was complete, he walked around to the back, only to freeze in disbelief. He had expected numerous sword markings carved into the stone, but the surface was completely bare. He questioned why nothing had been left behind, wondering if the demonic lord had simply chosen not to leave any sword marks for this final form. He asked Nano to search for any remaining traces. Nano identified a single sword mark created by one person and activated augmented reality to magnify it. Yeowun stared at the tiny puncture, startled by its nature. It was possible that this hole represented one of the codified fighting forms of the demonic lord's sword art. The idea of performing such a technique seemed almost impossible. Realizing the hole pierced straight through to the opposite side, hidden behind the poem, he questioned how such a clean strike had been made with seemingly minimal force. Yeowun reasoned that the concentrated energy required for the form must have erupted even before the technique was fully performed. If any more power had been used, the entire stone would have shattered. The absence of counter-technique markings was not because the demonic lord's sword art remained undiscovered, but because no ordinary sword technique could counter it. He understood then that the demonic lord had awakened to the deeper secrets of the sword in his final years, not by analyzing each fragment individually, but by becoming one with the sword itself. That unity extended to the very intent behind each movement. The intent of the sword was the will of the one who wielded it, and everything, technique, sword, and wielder, was meant to merge into a single whole. This revelation was the final secret of the last formation of the demonic lord's sword art. The moment Yeowun grasped it, he fell into an unforeseen trance. He collapsed to the floor and began meditating, and a radiant light burst from his body, glowing in every color. A surge of powerful energy swept throughout the room, sending wind rushing outward and knocking books to the ground. The instructor Gamgong, stationed on the 5th floor, was stunned. The vibrant light indicated that Yeowun had attained profound understanding and was ascending to a higher level. Gamgong could hardly believe what he was witnessing, the unification of the 5 energies unfolding before his very eyes. When an individual reached the level of Genesis Master, they unified the energies of heaven, earth, and humanity. Through this convergence, the body was purified of all impurities and transformed into a state of pure energy. Yet this achievement represented only half the journey. True completion came when the 5 energies within the body merged into one, elevating the individual to the level of ultimate Genesis Master. After about an hour, the multicolored radiance surrounding Yeowun condensed into a single brilliant white light that shuddered through his body. His bones and muscles began to restructure under its force. For 10 intense minutes, his body trembled, and then new phenomena emerged. His skin cracked faintly along his face, shocking the 3 warriors guarding him. They recognized instantly what it signified. He was undergoing physical restoration. Stunned into silence, they watched as a powerful gust erupted, and the cracks along Yeowun's body shattered into dust and scattered into the air. The violent burst of energy slowly faded, replaced by a profound stillness. Gamgung sensed the change and realized that the immense energy Yeowun had radiated a moment earlier had vanished entirely. His power had settled so perfectly into his body that even the deputy chief would be unable to detect it. Yeowun's eyes opened slowly. The instructors offered their congratulations on his achievement. Raising his hand, he immediately sensed the transformation within himself. He had reached the level of ultimate Genesis Master, and for the first time, he had experienced an awakening without the information being transferred directly into his brain. He bowed to the instructors, acknowledging the safeguard formation they had used to protect him during the trance. When he looked around, he noticed the scattered books and the dust coating the entire room. He apologized for the destruction caused by his breakthrough. Gamgong dismissed the concern with ease. A little mess meant nothing in the face of such an extraordinary accomplishment. As the instructors moved to inspect the fallen books, Yeowun turned back toward the sapphire stone pedestal. He summoned a thin layer of force chi over his finger and lightly pressed it against the tiny sword mark. With a simple rub, the mark collapsed and crumbled, erasing the final trace left on the stone. He inwardly decided that removing even the smallest possibility of anyone else learning the demonic lord's sword art was necessary, no matter how unlikely that chance might have been. Gamgong confirmed that the library had suffered no real damage and told him he was free to browse. Yeowun acknowledged this and turned his attention to the manuals. The first texts he scanned were the martial arts of the sixth sex, the sword sex sword art of lunacy, the stealth sex fists of stealth, the shadow sex flowing dark cloud palm, the musician sex sound wave strike, the poison sex demonic palm of the poison toad, and the saber sex illusory demon saber technique. While none of these were the strongest techniques of their respective sex, each one clearly held significant rank within the cult. He reminded himself that he only needed to scan 19 books, a process that took roughly 30 minutes. Afterward, he approached the remaining manuals. Aside from the butterfly blade dance, the volumes that drew his attention most were those originating from the 6 clans. The leaders of those clans had reached the Genesis level through these very techniques, and that fact alone made the manuals worth examining. His eyes shook with focus as he scanned every page. A short while later, Yeowun finished his work, exited the library, and made his way back toward his dormitory. Wang Hul and the others rushed to greet Yeowun the moment he returned, surrounding him with excitement as they offered their congratulations for passing the 5th examination. Their voices overlapped in their enthusiasm, while Moon-ku and Wang Hul immediately asked whether he had heard about the eerie sound inside the cave. Ho Sanghwa, who had not taken the test yet, grew visibly frightened at the mention of it and tried to shut down the topic, insisting that no such thing as monsters existed. So Jung attempted to tease her, but her comment earned her a strike to the face, leaving Wang Hul as the only one who found Sanghwa's reaction endearing. Yeowun noticed Sanghwa's fear and decided it was best not to reveal the truth of what had actually happened inside the cave. When Baekji entered the room, Yeowun retrieved the bowl he had hidden in storage. The overwhelming stench made every cadet cover their nose in disgust. The bowl contained the blood of an Amugi serpent, a mythical creature, but explaining it directly would have been impossible, so Yeowun provided a simple lie, stating that he had found it after making a wrong turn in the sealed demonic chamber. Yeowun then smiled and told them he wanted them all to drink it. His followers stared at him in disbelief, their expressions filled with dread as they tried to comprehend what he meant. Yeowun explained to his group that he had accidentally consumed some of the liquid, and despite its foul odor, it had completely cleansed his meridian channels of lingering toxins while enhancing the flow of his energy. He told them it would have been wasteful for him to be the only one to benefit from it, so he had brought a portion back in his sheath. Woman and Wang Hul whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable as they stared at the thick, dark substance. Neither wanted to drink it. As hesitation spread through the group, Hobum suddenly stepped forward with bold determination. He insisted that their lord had brought the liquid for their sake and declared that he would be the first to try it. He filled a cup without hesitation and pushed through the odor that made everyone else recoil. The sticky, viscous liquid made the 14 watching cadets grimace, yet Hobum drank it all in one motion, gulping until not a single drop remained. When he finished, he shouted with satisfaction, but the others only watched him cautiously. Moments later, the color drained from his face. He froze, and then the agony hit him. He collapsed, clutching his throat as his skin turned blue. His body twisted violently on the floor, his scream echoing through the room. Moon-ku stared in alarm, questioning whether this outcome was truly what Yeowun had described. After a painful interval, Hobum finally regained consciousness. Thick toxins surfaced from his pores, expelled from his body. When he stood up, his entire expression changed. He felt lighter, fresher, and filled with renewed vitality as his energy surged more freely than before. Yeowun responded calmly, reaffirming that he had already told them what the liquid would do. Seeing the transformation with their own eyes, the rest of Yeowun's followers overcame their hesitation. Everyone drank the liquid except Sanghwa, who refused until the very end, and Moon-ku, who was concerned about her mask. After a long and exhausting night, Yeowun woke early the next morning and made his way to the blacksmith located north of the academy. Sunong tested the serpent's horn by striking it with various weapons in the forge, but every weapon he used shattered upon impact. The result left Sunong completely stunned, overwhelmed by the material's hardness, and shocked by where Yeowun might have obtained it. Yeowun, however, chose not to reveal anything and kept the source to himself. Sunong's excitement grew as he examined the horn. Certain of its quality, he expressed full confidence that he could craft an extraordinary weapon from it and offered to forge a saber. Yeowun accepted the offer. Sunong then informed him that as a warden, he would also be provided with frost iron, giving him the option to commission a sword as well. Yeowun questioned this at first, having believed he was limited to a single request, but Sunong clarified that wardens had the privilege of requesting weapons at any time, with the only restriction being the limited supply of frost iron provided by the academy. If Yeowun brought his own materials, there would be no issue. Hearing this, Yeowun chose to commission a sword sword in addition to the saber. Internally, he felt satisfied with this opportunity. He intended to conceal the black sword he possessed until he could uncover why the words Demonic Lord's Sword were engraved on it. For the time being, having a new sword to use in its place would serve his purposes perfectly. Sonong estimated that each weapon would take about a month to craft given the exceptional quality of the materials. Yeowun was surprised by the time required and asked for the saber to be completed first. Sonong accepted the request with confidence, promising to have it ready within a month, and Yeowun thanked him before leaving the blacksmith. From there, he headed north toward the academy deputy office. When Yeowun presented his request, Lee Ha-meng questioned whether he was truly certain about the decision. Yeowun responded with calm assurance, and Ha-meng hesitated, understanding why such a choice carried weight. The request was not merely bold, it bordered on recklessness. Yeowun had chosen to challenge Jinwon-mu, chief of the Shadow Sect and first elder of the demonic warrior cult. Jinwon-mu had reached the level of ultimate Genesis master long ago, and his strength rivaled that of Ragyeom-ma, the patriarch's head bodyguard. Within the cult, he stood as one of the top 3 most powerful individuals. Ha-meng reflected on Yeowun's intentions. It was clear he sought to eliminate the leaders of the six sects first. Ha-meng had believed Yeowun's experience had tempered him into someone more cautious, yet it seemed his tendency toward daring risk still remained. With a weary sigh, Ha-meng agreed to proceed and stated that he would send the official request to the Shadow Sect. For the first time in 10 years, an envoy from Morim arrived at the demonic warrior cult palace in the 10,000 Great Mountains, which had caused a tremendous disturbance within the cult. Yet Yeowun, isolated within the academy and cut off from outside affairs, remained unaware of it. 7 days before the scheduled 6th test, several instructors came to escort him to the chief's office. Yeowun entered respectfully, sensing urgency from the summons. Lee Ha-meng greeted him with a troubled expression, prompting Yeowun's curiosity. When he asked what was wrong, Ha-meng apologized and informed him that the opponent for his 6th test had to be changed. Yeowun questioned the reason and wondered if the first elder had withdrawn, but Ha-meng denied it. Instead, Ha-meng hesitated, then released a wave of energy that sealed the office from all outside sound, signaling that what he was about to say was confidential. He explained only what he was allowed to reveal. At the moment, only the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th elders were present within the cult. Yeowun immediately understood the consequence. None of the high-ranking elders were available, meaning he would be unable to face any of the leaders of the six sects as he had planned. Ha-meng, reluctant to mention it, finally added that there had recently been a shift in positions among the elders. The chief of the poison sect, Baek-oh, had been demoted to 12th elder. The moment Yeowun heard this, the disappointment that had weighed on him vanished, replaced by a sharp, satisfied smirk. He recognized the opportunity now placed before him and accepted the new opponent without hesitation. 6 days before the 6th test, at the Poison Clan leader's office, the atmosphere turned grim. Numerous leaders of the Poison Clan gathered there, all wearing dark expressions as the consequences of the recent demotion settled heavily over them. Baek-oh sat in heavy contemplation, troubled by the recent turn of events. He had fully expected the chief of the Shadow Sect to eliminate Yeowun during the 6th test. To him, Yeowun was like a cup of wine laced with poison, seemingly harmless, yet disastrously dangerous. Over the past 3 years, the Shadow Sect had risen in strength, now surpassing even the Poison and Sword sects. He had anticipated that a direct clash between Yeowun and the Shadow Sect would force the Patriarch to weaken the Shadow Sect afterward. The 6 sects, including the Poison Sect, had been waiting for such an opportunity. But everything changed with the arrival of the envoy from Morim. The Poison Clan's advisor protested, insisting that Baek-oh reject the challenge. It had not been long since Baek-oh had returned from imprisonment to reclaim his position as elder, and the Patriarch's eyes were fixed on their every move. Baek-chow, the former clan leader, agreed, warning that any further misstep could destroy the balance among the 6 sects. However, Baek-oh's second son, Baek-mun-wong, argued that rejecting the challenge would only reveal their weakening influence. Baek-mun-ho, the third son, added that while Yeowun was already a superior level warrior, eliminating him now would be far easier than dealing with him later. Their long-standing hostility toward him made inaction even more dangerous. Baek-chow countered that Yeowun was not the true threat. Even if he possessed unmatched talent, he had no faction supporting him. The real danger lay with the Patriarch, whose intervention could devastate the Poison Sect. The heated debate rose to a peak until Baek-oh finally shouted for silence, immediately bringing the entire room to a halt. Baek-oh's expression hardened with contained fury as he acknowledged his desire to eliminate the one he despised, yet he restrained himself because acting now would cost too much. He announced that the request for the duel would be rejected. After the others departed, he walked to the small building where Chun Jung-sum lay. He sat before the injured young man, who could only blink weakly while lying down. Baek-oh looked at him with pained resolve and apologized, admitting that that as his grandfather, he could do nothing for him in this situation. Jongsum's eyes filled with tears as he struggled to form a broken whisper that reached for his grandfather. At that moment, a message arrived, informing Baek-oh that a guest had come. He questioned why anyone would visit at such an hour and attempted to send them away, but the telepathic message forced him to reconsider. Upon being told that Lady Mu of the Wise clan stood at his door, he agreed to step outside. Baek-oh left the room and Jongsum shifted his eyes to follow him. Through the open doorway, Jongsum noticed a figure faintly illuminated by the firelight. A middle-aged woman wearing a red veil. His eyes widened in shock, and his frail body began to tremble. He recognized her instantly as the woman who had obtained the microtoxins from his mother. Rage surged through him, but he lacked the strength to move his tongue or voice his thoughts, and he trembled helplessly until he lost consciousness. The next day, a letter arrived at the Academy's deputy office. It confirmed acceptance of the battle for the 6th examination. On the morning of the 6th test, the first such duel to be held in 70 years, Cheon Yeowun rose 4 hours before the appointed time and made his way to the blacksmith. When he entered the workshop, he found Usunong completely absorbed in his work. The blacksmith was stitching white leather with meticulous care, shaping it into a scabbard. Not wanting to interrupt, Yeowun remained silent and waited patiently until the task was finished. Nearly an hour passed before Sunong finally leaned back with satisfaction over the completed piece. Just as Sunong voiced his relief, Yeowun spoke, unintentionally startling him. The blacksmith nearly lost his balance at the unexpected sound, remarking on the surprise before hurrying into the processing room. Moments later, he returned with the finished blade. Yeowun's breath caught the moment he saw it. The weapon radiated a soft pearly white glow, its craftsmanship so refined that it stood unmistakably as a masterpiece. Sunong explained that he had engraved the name Yeowun requested. Near the hilt, the blade bore the inscription, White Dragon Blade. He asked Yeowun to lift the weapon, then held a thin piece of cloth above it. As the cloth drifted down, it split cleanly in half the moment it touched the blade. Yeowun felt genuine delight as he examined the weapon. He acknowledged that he had not expected such craftsmanship and praised Sunong as the finest blacksmith. Sunong laughed at the compliment. Yeowun inwardly recognized that with this saber, he would be able to execute the dancing butterfly technique with even greater power than Submeng and his notable blade. The black sword and this new white saber became symbolic weapons for him, and this moment marked the creation of the White Dragon Blade. Everyone, including the cadets, had gathered at the training ground of the Demonic Academy after about an hour. They had come to witness the 6th test. All eyes shifted toward Cheon Yeowun, who stood on the training ground with his eyes closed. Whispers spread through the crowd as awe and disbelief mixed with excitement. They marveled at the fact that the 6th test was being held at all, and that someone had reached such a level within just 4 years. Many questioned whether he could truly stand against an elder, but they all now understood that Yeowun had attained the level of Genesis Master. Speculation spread quickly. No one knew which elder Yeowun had chosen to face, but most assumed he had selected the weakest among them, the 12th elder, thinking it would be foolish to aim higher. The murmurs shifted as the chief stepped into view. Lee Ha-meng appeared from the main building, accompanied by one of the 12 elders, Sama Yi of the Samu clan. The cadets recognized him immediately as the 10th elder, and Sama Chuk watched his father with relief, not expecting to see him appear for this test. Another wave of reaction rippled through the crowd when they turned toward the academy entrance. Baek-oh, the leader of the Poison clan, was walking forward. Shock spread instantly. While some had guessed Yeowun might choose one of the elders from the 6 clans, no one expected it to be Baek-oh. His reputation was one of terror, known for massacring 300 enemies with poison and killing warriors so thoroughly that not even their bodies remained. He was widely feared in all of Wulin. As Baek-oh reached the center of the training ground, Yeowun opened his eyes. The sight of the Poison clan leader stirred the memory of Lady Hua, and anger flared within him, burning hot in his chest. Yet his gaze remained cold and steady. Lee Ha-meng's voice rang through the training ground, acknowledging the 12th elder for accepting Warden Chun's challenge request. He announced that the 9th elder, chief of the warrior dance sect, would serve as the official witness for the 6th examination. Baek-oh nodded and bowed slightly, though his expression remained stiff and displeased. Ha-meng noted the reaction. He could see that Baek-oh still carried resentment from the 2 years he spent imprisoned after the incident at the detention center. Ha-meng declared declared the beginning of the test and instructed both fighters to face each other from a distance of 12 steps. As they took their positions, the training ground fell silent under the weight of anticipation. When Hameng raised his hand and gave the signal to begin, Baeko exploded forward like lightning, closing the distance in an instant. His intent was murderous. He drove his staff, filled with concentrated force chi, straight toward Yeowun's chest with the full power of his opening strike. Yeowun's followers reacted with shock and outrage at the sudden attack, believing the duel would end the moment it began. But at the instant the staff pierced through Yeowun's chest, Baeko's expression faltered. The body in front of him dissolved. Yeowun had left behind a mirror image. Samayi froze in disbelief, recognizing the movement technique of the head royal bodyguard. Hameng jolted, realizing Yeowun had used the technique he had studied on the 5th floor of the library. As Baeko processed the deception, he quickly twisted his staff, unleashing a defensive formation behind him. Yeowun appeared at Baeko's back, but withdrew immediately to evade the counterattack. Baeko assessed his opponent's speed and noted how well Yeowun imitated the mirror image technique. Deciding to restrict his movement, he swung his staff sharply toward Yeowun's leg. Energy burst forth from the strike and shot toward Yeowun's lower body with lethal precision. Yeowun leapt into the air as the energy bullet struck the ground beneath him, bursting with a sharp explosion that sent dust rushing upward. Baeko shot through the cloud and drove forward with the 5th formation of the destructive poison art, aiming directly for Yeowun's leg. Realizing the intent to seal his movement, Yeowun reached for the handle of the white blade. As he drew it free, the narrow white weapon gleamed into view, and Baeko visibly flinched at the sight of a blade he had never heard of before. Yeowun spun the saber and unleashed the 2nd formation of the butterfly blade dance. The force chi of both formations collided, detonating in a violent burst that echoed painfully across the grounds. Cadets who had not yet reached the Grandmaster level winced and clutched their ears under the pressure of the sound. The two combatants pushed away from each other and regained distance. Baeko stared at the blade with cold shock. He examined the thin saber, noting that his dark iron staff had failed to break it and had even been dented instead. He assessed Yeowun's movements, surprised that someone who had only recently reached the level of Genesis Master fought with the composure and sharp instinct of a seasoned martial artist. He questioned whether Yeowun was truly only at the early stage of Genesis Master, as the power behind the saber matched his own 10-star energy. He sensed that Yeowun was still holding back, and he recognized how alarmingly fast the young warrior's martial prowess had grown. In that realization, he understood what Lady Mu had meant. His thoughts shifted to the memory of her visit 6 days before the 6th examination. She had urged him to accept the Academy's request, and he had questioned her authority to make such a demand. He had acknowledged her status as the Patriarch's wife, yet he had reminded her that she held no power to command him, an elder of the demonic cult and chief of a sect. Lady Mu had claimed to know the whereabouts of the Divine Physician, a healer reputed to cure any ailment short of death. She asserted that the Divine Physician could heal Baeko's grandson. Baeko had scoffed at the idea, believing that no one knew where the Divine Physician resided until Lady Mu produced a tile her grandfather had once received. According to her, presenting that tile at a certain place would grant an audience with the physician. She urged Baeko to kill Yeowun and assured him that, should complications arise, the Shadow Sect would provide support. She stated that the individual chosen for the minor priesthood had already been decided. In the present, Baeko understood why Lady Mu had approached him specifically. Apart from the 3rd elder and those ranked above, no other elder possessed the capability to confront someone of his own strength. He recognized that a single misstep could turn Yeowun into the greatest threat the Sixth Sex had ever faced. His eyes narrowed as poisonous energy began to radiate from his body. He intended to kill Yeowun right here, right now. Lee Hameng and Samayi immediately rose in alarm when they sensed the release of poison. They realized that Baeko was unleashing his toxin and questioned whether he truly planned to kill his challenger. Baeko let out a roar and released the 7th stage of the Destruction Demonic Poison state. Around the arena, cadets and instructors recoiled in fear, retreating from the purple haze and watching Yeowun with deep worry. His followers, despite their faith in him, felt the same dread and silently wished he would surrender. The poison swelled enough to engulf him entirely, yet Yeowun did not retreat. He glared at Baeko and hurled himself forward into the fog without hesitation. Baeko responded with certainty of victory, unleashing a storm of poisonous gas mixed from countless toxins. The cloud surged to consume Yeowun completely. Munku cried out in fear, and Baeko remained confident, convinced that Yeowun's body would be dissolved down to the bone. In that moment, a blue energy bullet blasted through the toxic mist and streaked toward Baeko's neck. He hurriedly raised his cold steel staff, channeling force chi to block the attack, but the assault did not end there. Yeowun had already closed the distance. Baeko attempted to counter, but shock overtook him as he witnessed Yeowun emerging from the poison. His skin, burned and eaten away by the toxins only moments ago, regenerated at a frightening speed. Veins and muscles writhed as they repaired themselves, the display grotesque in its intensity. The sight, along with the coldness in Yeowun's eyes, sent a chill deep into Baeko's bones. Yeowun tightened his fist, charging it with chi, and declared inwardly that it was now his turn. Bam! His punch crashed directly into Baeko's abdomen, forcing a spray of blood from the elder's mouth. As the impact exploded dust across the training ground, the cloud of poison still hung thick, corrupting everything it touched into blackness, and Yeowun's followers fell into despair. Hobum screamed for his lord and collapsed in tears. Hwang Hul believed no internal power could save a body from melting under such poison, and Mun-ku turned away with trembling eyes, unable to watch. A sudden sound cut through their fear. Something had been hurled across the field like a missile, smashing into the ground and bouncing violently until a deep crater formed. All attention shifted to the fallen figure. It was Baek-oh, the leader of the Poison Clan. The revelation stunned the crowd, and disbelief rippled through them as Yeowun stepped calmly out of the poison cloud. Sama-yi stared in shock, unable to comprehend how Yeowun had survived. The poison Baek-oh wielded had once been feared as a weapon of genocide, strong enough to disintegrate even the Genesis Master Myong-ok of the Wu-Tang sect during the war with the Murim Alliance. Baek-oh struggled to rise, his ribs shattered despite the energy shield he had used to lessen the impact. The force behind Yeowun's strike had been overwhelming, and he could scarcely comprehend the regeneration unfolding before him. Confusion and disbelief clouded his mind. Yeowun stood before him, closing the distance in an instant. He lifted his blade and unleashed the final formation of the butterfly blade dance. Baek-oh braced himself, realizing this attack could not be blocked with bare strength alone. He tightened his jaw and accepted that he had no other choice. His skin shifted into a dark, ominous blue as the blade came crashing down. Multiple strikes landed against him, yet the saber rebounded with the sound of clashing metal. Yeowun stepped back, surprised as the dark blue poisonous energy pushed against the blade and began burning through his skin. Nano reported the extraction of invasive poison and initiated regeneration. His wounds began to repair themselves as Baek-oh let out a fierce cry and charged forward. The impact sent Yeowun skidding back several steps before he regained his footing and glared ahead. The poisonous aura radiating from Baek-oh had changed completely. The earlier technique had not been his strongest. Now his entire form had transformed into poison itself. Lee Ha-meng observed darkly that Baek-oh had assumed a poisonous form. This final stage of his poison arts hardened his skin like armor while releasing a corrosive poison potent enough to melt stone. Ha-meng had never imagined this level of terror. Even the Lord himself would struggle to stop Baek-oh now. No one in the entire demonic academy could stand against him. The sands lifted violently under the poisonous energy erupting from his body, and the ground around him began to melt beneath the overwhelming toxicity. Baek-oh's icy resolve carried the meaning that Yeowun had forced him to ascend to the 8th level of the destructive demonic poison state, and he challenged Yeowun to try stopping him with that treasured weapon. Yeowun realized the white dragon blade would not be enough. His eyes narrowed and he set the blade aside, a gesture that filled Baek-oh with rising excitement. Yeowun then thrust the blade into the ground. As chi surged through it, the impact sent debris and dust exploding outward, forming a swirling shroud that engulfed him and Baek-oh. Cadets nearby ducked as the blast of wind and scattered earth tore through the air. Baek-oh responded by gathering poison into both hands and charging forward, expressing pure mockery toward Yeowun's attempt to rely on tricks until the end. At the same moment, a dark and ominous energy began swirling around Yeowun's hand. Baek-oh suddenly felt a demonic force so terrifying that it surpassed anything he had experienced. It was the same chilling sensation he had felt when his eyes had met Yeowun's just before he was struck earlier. Chi surged through Yeowun's arm and condensed into the form of a sword. Sensing deadly danger from that demonic presence, Baek-oh decided he had to strike first. He charged, shaping the poisonous energy in his hands into a massive demonic hand that lunged toward Yeowun with lethal force. The attack that Baek-oh believed no one alive could withstand was shattered in an instant. Countless sword strikes exploded against it, cutting through the poisonous construct. Shock filled Baek-oh as he witnessed a black sword glowing with dark light tearing through the air toward him. He attempted to defend himself, gathering every trace of poison within him to erect a barrier, but it crumbled immediately. Agonizing pain tore from him as the black sword pierced his blood points, carving through his body and drenching him in his own blood. In a swift reversal of his grip, Yeowun brought the sword across Baek-oh's neck in one clean motion. Blood burst forth like a violent fountain, staining the air with black and crimson as Baek-oh's head was severed. Within the swirling dust cloud, only screams echoed. No one could see what was happening. Fear spread as the cadets tried to make make sense of the sounds. As the dust slowly cleared, a silhouette emerged. It was Cheon Yeowun, drenched in blood, holding something in his hand. The severed head of Baek-oh, the chief of the Poison Clan. Shock tore through the crowd as fear and awe spread across every face. Lee Ha-meng stood frozen in disbelief, and Sama-yi stared with his mouth hanging open. The entire training ground fell silent as everyone looked upon Baek-oh's headless body. Munku and Hobum remained motionless, tears streaming down their faces as they tried to comprehend what had just occurred. The silence finally cracked under the cadets' trembling murmurs. They struggled even to form their words as they tried to accept the sight before them. They whispered Yeowun's name and the fact that he had killed the chief of the poison sect, each voice shaking with disbelief. Ha-meng observed the scene with grim heaviness. His thoughts held the weight of everything he had just witnessed. Yeowun had killed Elder Baek even in his poisonous form, something Ha-meng himself would not dare face directly. The boy who once knew nothing of martial arts had grown in only 4 years into one of the strongest martial artists within the entire cult. From the Wise clan, Chun Mu-yeon trembled as he watched. His fists tightened with frustration and he turned away without a word. His followers, who had nearly cried out in excitement at the overwhelming display of strength, hurried after him. Jin Chang assessed the moment with unease. He recognized Yeowun's power as befitting a descendant of the Chun bloodline, yet concern knotted his thoughts. Elder Baek had openly used poison in an attempt to kill Yeowun, making the killing justified. But with their chief dead, he feared how the poison sect would respond and how the remaining 5 clans might react as well. Yeowun himself felt no sense of completion. It still was not enough. Yeowun reflected on the battle with restrained frustration. He had wished to defeat Baek-oh using only the dancing butterfly technique, yet it had proven useless against the poisonous form. He understood now that every future enemy would possess hidden trump cards just as Baek-oh had. He needed to grow far stronger. This victory was only the beginning of the vengeance he sought for his mother. The instructors quickly wrapped Baek-oh's severed head and body and carried them away on a stretcher. With Sama-yi's approval, Lee Ha-meng rose and announced Yeowun's success in the 6th test. The training ground erupted instantly. Cadets cheered with overwhelming excitement, celebrating the first successful completion of the 6th test in 70 years. Yeowun smiled as his group rushed toward him. Wang Hul, still red-eyed from tears, shouted his congratulations with joy. Oh-jong added a playful remark about addressing him as an elder, and their laughter spread through the group as they congratulated him. Sama-chuk ran toward his father with urgency, wanting to say his farewell before Sama-yi departed. Sama-yi acknowledged him warmly, noting how much his son had grown. Sama-chuk bowed and asked about his father's well-being, and Sama-yi responded with lighthearted ease. As they exchanged greetings, Sama-yi sent a telepathic message to his son. He asked whether Sama-chuk had chosen which candidate of the minor priesthood he intended to serve. Sama-chuk admitted that this was exactly what he had hoped to discuss before his father left. He apologized and explained that although he had originally wanted to serve a candidate from one of the 6 clans, his heart kept guiding him towards serving young Master Cheon Yeowun. Sama-yi's expression softened with pride. His smile showed that his son's choice did not surprise him. He told Sama-chuk that he respected the decision and could clearly see the value in following Yeowun. If circumstances aligned, Yeowun might even become his next brother-in-law, so he instructed him to take care of him well. Sama-chuk frowned with embarrassment, realizing his father was already thinking far ahead of him. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.